introduce Jimmy. Jimmy Bayssari is a co-founder and head of product and risk at Project Everest Ventures, Australia's first and only B Corp certified impact incubator and mobility provider. He has worked in the social enterprise sector space for 7 years, including coordinating, executing, and leading multiple impact and development projects overseas. He's also a certified B Corp consultant, where he helps companies match profit with purpose and measure their impact by becoming Corp certified. And let's get you off of mute there. Perfect.
Hey.
Obviously, I'm already I'm losing my words. It's been a long 2 days, but thank you so much, Jimmy, for joining us, and welcome.
No, thank you for the warm introduction. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we're good.
Wonderful. Always worried about the tech.
I know, exactly. So just as a preface, we did speak to Mark Daniels yesterday. So anyone who was on that session yesterday has already heard a bit about social enterprise, but I'm keen to hear from you how you got involved in social enterprise and what makes you passionate about it.
Yeah, awesome. Well, it goes back, I think over 10 years ago now, when I was doing a range of, those standard volunteer trips in Thailand and parts of South America, working in different areas in orphanages or, doing the usual, teach them English or paint a school or whatever it might be. And I remember going through that whilst I was doing my undergrad at uni, and kind of realizing at the same time, it was a really pivotal moment when I was in Thailand, doing a bit of a hike into some villages that were in the mountains in a small province 8 hours south of Bangkok. And we basically took, supplies like rice, water, oil, etc. We hiked, 2 nights into the village because it was the only way to get there. And I remember getting there and being in this village of, I think it was about 50 or 60 people. And then, had an interpreter with us. We kind of dropped the supplies. Everyone said thank you. And what stuck with me was there was a small child there who was suffering from like a cleft palate and some other illnesses. And basically they said to us, a bit of a trigger warning here, but the child's gonna die and there's nothing we can do about it. And then we laid the resources that we had at their feet, and then we exited and, hiked for the couple of days back. And then that was it, never kind of touch base there again. And for me, it kind of sparked, it has to be a bit of a different way of doing this. And I understand that aid and cash is one of the biggest things in emergency relief or disaster relief. But in terms of long-term sustainability, social enterprise kind of really has a place. So from there, I kind of finished off uni and I actually started working for a few different social enterprises. But the pivotal one for me was where I worked for 40K, which is a little bit similar to what we do now at Project Everest. But they're an edtech company doing an edtech social enterprise outside of India. And they were offering, tablet-based solutions to kids in after-school settings. So parents would pay a nominal amount for the service, and students would go to these, what they call these pods, and learn English and arithmetic after school. And there was studies done, and it was proven to kind of increase their literacy skills in English, which in certain parts of India was seen as, a huge bonus in terms of being able for children to be able to succeed in the job market, particularly in the international space. So it kind of sparked my interest in the whole model of, putting the power back to consumers and allowing them to kind of choose what products or services they pay for, which would benefit them. And so, kind of at that point, I met my co-founders at one of those companies that I worked for, and we kind of split away and started Project Everest. And the reason that we did that was because we really wanted to define social enterprise and not limit it in a negative way, but kind of really narrow the scope and say that it's the product or service that offers the beneficial good to the consumer, as opposed to other models. So you see like a lot of companies in the social enterprise space that do either one-for-one models or, 50% of profits are committed back to a cause. And so rather than it actually being inherent in what they offer. So some enterprises will, sell to the Western or developed economies, fulfill that need there, and then use those profits to, pass it on to developing economies, whether it be in sanitation, education, etc. And we're trying to redefine that and say, well, how can we actually develop products or services that are made for those developing economies themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and obviously there is a need, there is a demand in those places. So how can you deliver that in a commercial way?
Yeah. Sorry, did you say how would we deliver that in a commercial way?
Oh, well, I mean, we can certainly get into that. So let's talk about, the fact that this led you to set up Project Everest. So tell us about how Project Everest works, then a little bit more, and what other organizations can learn from that approach.
Yeah, absolutely. So we basically exist to validate products and services overseas. And we do this by taking on a number of clients from developed economies who have technology, and we test those technologies and validate them in developing economy markets. So to give you an example, we work with a client at the moment who is an ophthalmologist, has developed a kind of proprietary flat pack glasses system and a testing kit, a portable testing kit that tests for basic refractive error. So the founder of that company, she could train anyone on this call who's not a medical professional within about an hour to use the testing kit. And then using an app, diagnose someone with refractive error and then issue the flat pack glasses on the spot for quite a low, affordable amount, which is quite amazing. So that's been tested in parts of Australia and parts of Papua New Guinea. And we've been involved in the testing around different communities in Australia. We're actually running tests down the South Coast as we speak. And we'll be working with her to test that in areas like Fiji, Timor-Leste, and India, once our borders reopen. So if we gather enough data to validate that there's a need in those economies for such a product, we would then go on to help the client develop out a business plan and establish themselves in those markets. And basically what that allows is then people and communities in those areas to then have access to affordable eye testing and affordable glasses to fix refractive error. And then through our kind of impact measurement, what we then see is, hopefully causal links to, increasing in education, literacy, employment retention, things like that, which all then feed into the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which is one of our largest focuses. So that's how we work in a nutshell on our main side. And then additionally, we also run a number of what we call impact programs. And those impact programs are focused on training tertiary students, so students who are at university, through like intense block-based period programs overseas, rurally in Australia, and also online now, to develop their leadership skills, explore the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and actually expose them to social enterprise. So we don't just like link them up with different partners. We're not like a placement provider. They actually work with us through being guided on the projects that our clients have engaged us to perform. So students may go out and actually assist with testing the glasses, for example. So using the kits, gathering the data, all in the formats that we provide so that we can produce the reporting that we need to do, and they'll be involved in that process. And along the way, we provide a number of workshops and training, expose them to those developing economies, and then, provide intense leadership opportunities for them to kind of continue that on, all while, exposing them to lean startup and the social enterprise space.
Wow. So it's great that you're providing that education for new social enterprise entrepreneurs in the future, as well as actually creating the social impact that you already have. So how do you actually identify what projects you're going to either invest in or create in different communities?
Such a good question. So we have ground teams in the different areas that we work. And we do a lot of kind of community engagement to ensure that the kind of issues that we're targeting are relevant. So, for example, in Fiji, we work closely for the Ministry of Agriculture, Department of Health, at government level, and then at local level we work with within their village kind of structures. So we liaise quite consistently with village elders, and we've done all the necessary steps to kind of gain access, ethically, etc., to be able to conduct our research. And then based on what we find, we then link up what we call our impact partners, who are our clients, with those economies. So if it is a client who's focusing on health comes to us, we would say we think that we could start this in these areas in Fiji and these areas in Timor-Leste. If an agriculture company came to us, say for ag tech, we would probably likely say we have these areas in India which we could experiment with, and these parts in Timor-Leste, but maybe not necessarily in Malawi, because we already know of these many NGOs who are kind of taking care of that issue. So that's how we kind of link it up to our clients, to those communities. And we also conduct what we call a range of experiments using a focus framework or lean startup methodology. And I can provide a link to that after this as well for everyone if they want to have anyone's interested. To actually rapidly test what we think might be the issue. So if we use all that kind of space, and we also look at customer journey mapping and all of that design thinking, to really, really target what customers are or our communities are actually wanting or needing.
Okay, cool. To develop those ventures. Awesome. I think that resource would be really useful, I think, for others who are potentially interested in setting up their own or exploring perhaps this space of social enterprise and what possibilities there are for solving problems that they might have in their communities. So I guess we can, I brought you on because I'm both interested in your social enterprise background and also to talk specifically about B Corp certification. That's certainly something that has been raised a few times through the course of this summit. And I know a few of the people that have been attending the whole thing are particularly interested in B Corp as a certification for products that they purchase, as well as potentially for their own businesses. So can you tell me about, let's start looking at certifications generally and why they're important, and then how B Corp perhaps fits into that and might be different from other certifications.
Yeah, absolutely. I could talk about B Corp all day. So this is great. I'm glad people are interested. So look, there are a range of certifications that exist out there that companies, social enterprise, NGO, for-profit, whatever it might be, can, go on to attain to kind of show that they're meeting best performance practices or best practices in their specific industry. And you find that there are kind of ones that apply to, all businesses or industry specific as well. So you might have fair trade, organic certifications if you produce, food, etc. And you've got all the ISO certifications as well. So you have to meet like a certain set of criteria to achieve ISO. You have to fill out a lot of frameworks, etc., to kind of certify yourself in that space. What I also notice about those sorts of certifications is that some of the eligibility criteria may only be, one or two things that a company needs to meet. So, for example, for you to be to say that you're 1% for the planet, if that makes sense, you have to donate 1% of your profits every year to the charity, who then goes on to do those sorts of projects that support environmental causes. When you look deep into it, though, it doesn't really consider a holistic approach to whatever the business might be. So that business may have unethical supply chains, and may be exploiting labor in different parts of the world, but because their environmental goals are great and they commit that 1%, then it's, A-okay, and no one really sees that side. And ideally, we would want that to not be the case. So what I love about B Corp is it's a holistic approach. And it basically gets you to consider 5 key areas. So you have workers, your governance, the environment, communities that you impact, and also the customers that you impact. And it's moving a focus away from even at a legal level or a governance level, from boards or directors or owners or founders of companies to not just consider themselves or shareholders anymore, to actually consider all those stakeholders in their key decision making. And when you go through the B impact assessment, which is the primary tool to help you achieve B certification, and I can talk about that a bit in a minute as well, you'll see like the questions that they ask even in the governance section of the B impact assessment is things like, does your key performance indicators for your board consider environmental impact? So is it not just primarily linked to your P&L, which most KPIs are, but do you embed your environmental outputs that you want to achieve into the P&L itself? Do you put a monetary amount on it, or do you link KPIs to it? So would a CEO's KPI be to actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions for the company? And what percentage of reduction would that be? And actually, is that baked in? And that's kind of the questions that it asks at the deeper level, which allow companies to earn points, which go towards the performance requirement to allow them to actually certify. And additionally, the BIA, or the B impact assessment, acts as a roadmap to kind of allow companies to increase their sustainability, because inherently the requirement for eligibility is to recertify every 3 years. And you have to show that you're improving each time you recertify. You can't just recertify with what you've already been doing. So it actually kind of forces companies to really consider their approach in those kind of key areas. And part of that then allows consumer confidence, because if you see that a company is B Corp certified, you know that they've considered that kind of holistic approach. And you can try and rest knowing that the company doesn't engage in any sort of slave labor on one hand, and it also looks after their workers on another hand, whilst also positively contributing to environment. And it's owner's board, whichever is the highest level of governance, is actually considering all of those key stakeholders in their decisions, which is a pretty cool thing when you take that out and you look at all the other certifications, which kind of isolate those different areas.
I think it's also important to point out, you touched on ISO, and I often have, because of my background working in supply chains and procurement, having procurement people saying like, can't we just require all of our suppliers to have ISO 14001 and that just like takes care of it? No, that is a management system certification, not performance. It's not looking at, are they actually improving over time, or how do they compare with others in terms of their performance? It's interesting that a lot of your examples around B Corp actually are still talking about their management approach, but B Corp also very much looks at impact measurement, right? So can you expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, so with the impact measurement, the way that the BIA is designed, and B Corp released a new tool called the UN SDG Action Manager, which they developed in line with the UN Global Compact. So a lot of the examples or what they require you to measure in certain questions that they asked are directly or indirectly linked to the UN SDGs. So I'm trying to think of a specific example I can give you to show impact measurement. So it might say like, what can you demonstrate that you've decreased emissions over the past 4 years? And then it will give you a link and it will say, using these IRIS metrics, which is like an impact investment measurement platform, or these sub kind of goals from the UN SDGs, can you demonstrate how you've decreased over the last 4 years? And then they actually have a way for you to kind of show that you can measure that and then place that in there. So then when you complete the BIA, you can also then track over time, as you recertify, your kind of increase in your performance in those key different areas. And it simply does it in the BIA via a score, via numbers. But then when you look into it, you can actually break it down, and it encourages you to keep track of those differing kind of performance measurements using those other platforms that directly link into the BIA. So for example, at Project Everest, we use the IRIS platform, which I can also provide a link to. If people want to, you can make a free account, you can explore it, see how it all works. But we use that to kind of track how each of our clients and ourselves are creating that impact over time. And then we do that using theory of change models, etc. And then what we would do is we would use those theory of change models, the IRIS metrics, to then act as our evidence for achieving the points in the B impact assessment. Does that make sense? Well, I think you're on mute.
There we go. There keeps being background noise, so I keep muting myself. I think it's good to perhaps expand on that a little bit more around what that certification process does involve while you're kind of touching on that you've been going through with IRIS. Yeah. So if anyone here did want to perhaps become a B Corp in the future, yeah, what are the things that they need to consider, and what's the process for actually getting certified?
Yeah, absolutely. So it all starts with the BIA, so the B impact assessment. So my first kind of piece of advice would be take 2 or 3 hours and tackle the BIA and just answer it as high level as you possibly can. You'll make mistakes as you go through, as the questions tend to get more complicated the deeper that you go into the impact assessment itself, and see what your initial score is. So that's what you do. Just do the BIA, see what your initial score is, and then the next step would be to kind of gather all of your evidence. So each question that you answer will let you know what you can provide to prove that you're actually doing what you say you're doing for a baseline. So if there is a question about your leave policies for workers or for employees or staff, one of the things that you could provide is like copies of your policies, an email blast or a Slack message that shows that you've communicated it out to your team, because it's not enough just to have the policy, because no one could have seen it, in the course of the business. So you need to show that you've actually communicated it to the team and that, those workers are engaging with those policies. And then that would satisfy, the requirement to answer that particular question. And that may get you, 1.2 points, for example. Once you've completed the BIA and you've gathered I'm giving a very high level approach here, by the way, but you've gathered all your evidence and you've uploaded it all. What you can do then is submit what's called submitting for verification. So this process can take anywhere between 3 to 12 months, depending on how adept you are at gathering that evidence and how solid that evidence is. And also due to the backlog of the amount of companies trying to complete the verification process. So you submit for verification and you have to then complete a disclosure questionnaire, which is a set of about 51 questions. And it just asks you, like, do you engage in arms trafficking, or have you supplied to terrorist groups, etc. Because you're not going to get certified if you have. So it asks you to kind of disclose all of that. And then from there, what will happen is you'd be assigned a standards assessor. So what's awesome about the certification process is that B Corp, which is based out of the US, and all the local chapters in the different regions. So in Australia and New Zealand, we have B Lab ANZ, where there's a B Lab South America, for example, B Lab EU. They don't actually do the certification. They act as a body for existing B Corps or companies aspiring to be B Corps to provide advice, facilitate community, assist in the B Corp movement. But the actual people that assess for certification are part of what's called the B Lab or the B Standards Analyst Trust. And they're a set of individual assessors who complete the verification process. And so not even the staff who work in those local chapters know exactly what they're looking for throughout the certification process, which keeps the kind of integrity around it. So you'll be assigned an assessor who will go through your impact assessment and randomly say, we want more evidence for A, B, C, D, E. And they usually ask for more evidence for about 60% of the questions. And it's all randomized, so you don't know what it is that they're going to ask you. And then they'll say to you, you have, this time frame to kind of provide it. And then we'll go from there. Once you've provided it, they'll assess you. And if you still meet the performance requirement of 80 points, they'll do a review call with you. And that review call is about 90 minutes where they ask you about your business, your revenues, your staff, your processes, random checks on the questions you've answered. They ask you questions about your evidence, just to kind of clarify any key points. And then from there, if you do have still meet the performance requirement of 80 points, they'll move you into the second stage, where you get assigned to a second assessor for review. If you don't meet the performance requirement because the evidence you provided is not enough, or you've selected the wrong sector or the wrong industry by accident, or whatever it might be, you will be given the opportunity to kind of rectify that. So they may say to you, we're going to give you 1 month to introduce these 4 key policies. Here are some links to be able to do it. If you do that effectively and it meets the requirements, we'll be able to certify you. Or if you don't meet it in that month, we're going to push you into the next cohort. So then your certification process is delayed even further. Once you've actually achieved all of that, second review, so it's peer review to make for standards, etc. So they check it all again. If necessary, they'll jump on another call, depending on the evidence that you provided in the second round. And then from there, they'll review your disclosure questionnaire, do a background check on the company, to make sure that your disclosure questionnaire checks out. And then from there, if necessary, it would go to committee review. So if there are a few things that they're not sure about, or you've answered yes to one of the questions in the disclosure questionnaire, that may not necessarily disqualify you from certifying, but they would want extra information on, it may go to committee review. So where a team of the analysts review it. And then from there, provided everything checks out, you're eligible. So you have been operating for at least 12 months. You're a for-profit company, so you can't be an NGO or a government or anything like that. Those companies are ineligible for B Corp certification, as the purpose is to combine profit and purpose. So yeah, 12 months, you are for-profit or a business, so you're registered as a business, you don't have DGR status, and you meet the performance requirement. So you meet the 80 points or more, and you agree to the transparency requirement. So that is to have your B impact assessment published live online for everyone to see. So you can go to B Corp, look up Project Everest Ventures and view our entire BIA, our entire B impact assessment, and what we answered, what we do well, what we don't do well, what we need to improve, what we're aiming to improve on, which is really cool. And you agree to that. You sign what they call a declaration of interdependence, which shows your commitment to recertifying every 3 years, to upholding the B Corp values, to consider all stakeholders. And then you have to adopt a legal requirement. So you actually have to amend the company's constitution, and if necessary, any shareholder agreements, to not only consider under your fiduciary duties as directors or owners or whatever it might be, shareholders in the company, but all those different stakeholders that I was explaining before. So it's actually baked in as a requirement. And then once you've done all of that, you pay your certification fee and you become certified. And that process, like I said, can take anywhere from a couple of months to a year and a half, depending on how quick you are with it. And the kind of advice I would give with that is, one, it has to come from the top down. So if a lot of the time with bigger or larger companies, you have middle management or a CSR team saying, this is really, really cool, we should become B Corp certified. But the reality is there are so many changes to policy or procedure or the way that things are done that it really needs to come from the top down, because you need to amend those things in order to be able to certify. So we actually find that it's easier to work with small to medium-sized enterprises than you do like large multinational corporations, because they're a bit slower to move. So yeah, it's quite interesting. And there are so many things you can go into. You can look at like operations versus impact business models. So when you're doing the BAA, you do earn more points if you have an impact business model. So that's where the product or service you provide actually has an inherent impact on the customer, versus operations, which is how do you internally carry out your business ethically and sustainably. And they look at those two different things in the BAA, and you'll find that as you answer questions and how you answer questions, other questions might open up. So if you do answer and say our product is a health product, you would then see a whole range of questions open up around health products, and it would say like, who are you targeting? How are you measuring that target? What are you trying to achieve? How do you measure those achievements? Can you provide evidence of that, etc.? So you might find yourself answering, anywhere between 80 questions to 200 plus, depending on your business.
And it's such a good way of balancing that, because someone asked Ask Gordon Renouf of Good On You yesterday about how do you balance the small businesses who don't have as much of an impact generally versus the really, really large businesses who they might be doing good things, but they still have a bigger impact.
Yeah.
So I love that you've got that point system where it acknowledges that there are different ways of being a sustainable company instead of having a very inflexible, I guess, framework, which a lot of the other certifications really do.
Yeah, and it's all normalized as well, which helps that process. So the point system is normalized. So if you have a heavier focus on, but based on the sector that you choose once you launch into the BAA, if your company, for example, falls into the manufacturing stream, you're going to be asked a lot more questions on, the state of your factory, for example. And so how do you kind of manage your factory, for example, and the workers within that and the standards within that? Whereas someone who is like a law firm is not going to be asking you those questions because they would fit into, services with a minor environmental footprint. They operate out of an office or they work from home. So what you might find is that a lot of their questions on environment may be around your work from home policies. So how do you encourage carbon reduction in your employees' homes? Do you provide at-home recycling services? Do you connect them with those sorts of services, etc.? So the questions would be very different, but they'd be weighted equally depending on those streams to make sure that companies have a fair chance of certifying based on what they are trying to achieve in the, doing social good and environmental good.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I love how there's a bit of feedback in that process as well. It's not just a, no, you're not there yet, and we're just gonna write you off, but that they do provide, these are the areas that there's a little bit of a gap. So if you can fill that gap, then we can proceed.
Yeah.
Or you can, go away and work on it a little bit longer if that's what you need and recertify later.
Absolutely. And it's awesome because it's not just a certification. You find that it enables a sort of community and also acts as a roadmap. So for companies that aren't able to achieve certification just yet, it provides a roadmap on how to actually be better at doing social and environmental good. So how can you achieve those high levels of standards and transparency, for example? And for community, you find that B Corps might start to source from other B Corps. So I know internally we also look at, okay, can we say that 15% of our suppliers is reserved for B Corps in that space to kind of really encourage people to meet those standards, if that makes sense. So yeah, it's pretty cool in that element. And even like our graduates who have done our impact programs, because they know about the B Corp process, start to actually look in their future graduate employers for that kind of status, because they know the sorts of questions that are asked and they know the standards that are required of those companies in terms of for their workers. And it gives them confidence when actually applying for those roles that, there might be a positive impact on culture, for example. And so you might see even an increase in companies being able to retain talent for having such sort of certification.
Totally. And I just realized, because our previous speaker was from a B Corp, so Millie
Awesome.
worked at Blue Rock Accounting, and I was totally surprised. I was like, why is an accounting firm a B Corp?
Yeah.
And yeah, she talks about how much that it probably isn't that the B Corp certification affects the culture, but that is the culture of the business that is similar to other B Corps, that is just much more focused on the well-being, certainly of all of their staff, but also making sure that they're doing the right thing with their clients and that they are working with clients that are purpose aligned with them as well. Yeah,
exactly. And you find so many companies, and I think that's what sets it apart as well, because, with something like I've said it before, but like with 1% for the planet, you find a lot of companies that are environmentally focused go for that kind of element, or Similar with ISO, for example, whereas with B Corp, if you look at the list of certified B Corps, it ranges from accounting firms to law firms to all the way for companies that actually have an outward social purpose, if that makes sense. And you just know that it's their operational or the way that they run the business internally, which is enabling it to be certified, which is awesome.
Yeah, awesome. And you kind of touched on that more and more employees are looking to go to these kinds of businesses. Obviously, more and more consumers are looking to purchase from them as well.
Absolutely.
Why do you think certifications are so important? Or, it was only probably, 5 years ago that I think certifications people weren't as aware of certifications. They were aware of, say, fair trade, but it was a pretty limited group of certifications. And now I think that awareness has grown. So why do you think that is so important for consumers? What is the role of certification as well?
Yeah, I think an example that I kind of use is like, think about millennial buying power and how it's increasing and how it's only going to increase in the next 10 years. And previously, I think there was an example I used, and I can probably try and find the article. It was like years ago, but a whole kind of thing came out about, the Hart Foundation tick. So a lot of people, when they bought products, would see a certification and immediately kind of the general consensus was to just trust it. Yeah, it's a tick from the Hart Foundation, it must be great. And then there was a whole kind of investigation into companies paying for ticks of approval, for example, which kind of undermines consumer confidence, right? Because how can you trust it if you find out that companies can sponsor studies for it, for example? And there seems to just be a general consensus in up and coming generations around those sorts of kind of critiquing those sorts of certifications and going, okay, but what does it actually mean to have that as a certification? And do I inherently trust that product or service? Like, who is the company behind that product or service in itself? And do I want to put my money there? Because they realize that, being able to purchase something is one of the greatest forms of consumer power, in being able to influence where businesses go with the products they produce and how they treat community customers and workers. So what we're seeing now is like, I think the stat was like 64% based on a Deloitte survey of millennials will research companies that they buy from and make sure that they are ethical in the products that they produce. And they're more likely to question them as well and do it so in a public forum. And if companies are not putting out public statements on social issues that are, prevalent in today's media, then they're less likely to have faith in those companies. And so the huge thing is that we want to see credibility behind those certifications that are given to companies, because it's becoming more and more rare for people to just inherently see a certification and trust it. And so we want to know what goes behind being able to achieve that before you go, yes, okay, well, I feel like I don't need to do my individual research because I know someone's done it for me because I know what goes behind achieving that certification.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Nick has also just asked, what are the most common challenges you've seen businesses face when trying to attain B Corp certification?
Oh, absolutely. The biggest one, which I mentioned before, is it not coming from the top-down approach. So whoever is responsible for trying to achieve the certification has trouble changing policy or implementing policy that's required of the certification, or they're just not willing to adopt the legal change. So because of what it would tie people to, or it requires, mass shareholder agreement to change a constitution, etc. Biggest one is the time commitment. So gathering of evidence is another block. So people go into it and they're like, it's just too hard. It seems so time consuming. They lack understanding of the BIA itself. So how it intricately works, so the different sectors, how to choose the right track, how to provide that evidence is a big one too. And then, they're the kind of the major challenges. And then I would say the fourth one, which I would give to you as well, is around the idea of no docs, no points. So people go through it and they submit with an inflated score because they're like, yeah, we spoke about this at a company meeting, a few months ago. Or we spoke about this and yeah, we do that ad hoc, but it's not documented anywhere. So we can't actually prove that we do it. And so even though we've selected yes to everything, and we're like, sweet, like we got 120 points. We're 40 above the certification requirement. And they submit and the analyst comes back and goes, you're actually at 62 because you have no evidence for half of this. And so whoever's doing it sits there and goes, I now don't have time to do the rest. So we're going to scrap it or just leave it as it is. So yeah, they're the kind of biggest challenges that companies go through.
And that one can be particularly difficult, I know, for small businesses. I'm even small business owner friends of mine, they're like, why would I need to have a written policy about code of conduct or employee ethics and stuff? I'm like, well, you don't need it until you need it. And that it is important to demonstrate to external policies that you're taking it seriously and that this is evidence in place. It's not just, as you say, like we think that we're doing these things, but are they actually being implemented in practice?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly it. And that my advice there to companies would be always start early, because a lot of startups that I've worked with, or even kind of companies that are just going into growth phase, are like, why do we don't need it yet, or we do it anyway. But the reality is that when you get to the bigger side, it becomes harder and harder to implement. So do it now, so you grow up with it, and then you don't have to change it later on because it's done like that from the beginning. Because if you are the founder and you're going through this, you can write a policy and it can be implemented. But once you hand over part of that control to an external board or independent governance, etc., you now have 9 people it needs to clear through and 7 levels of management, which is not conducive to quick change. So yeah, I'd say start early.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. All right, my last big question for you is one piece of advice. So what's your number one piece of advice for a small business looking to build their sustainability credentials?
Okay, that'd be just that. Start early, do it early, look at everything that you want to do early and strive for continuous improvement. And consider all those kind of key stakeholders, including the environment, not alongside your shareholders or balancing profit and what you want to achieve. And if you can start to make decisions like that from the beginning, you'll embed that within the culture that you foster in your kind of startup or your business. And you'd be surprised at how quickly that actually links into then increased profits. Because if you have the standard happy, healthy staff base and happy and healthy customers, well then that all ties to money coming through the door.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, brilliant. And everyone obviously wants to continue this conversation. So what are some opportunities for people to get in touch with you or to continue that process with B Corp?
Absolutely. Well, I can send through the links to the B Impact Assessment and an Intro to B Corp course, which is free, that's been developed by B Lab, ANZ and Torrens University. And feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Should I just pop my LinkedIn in the chat, Sarah, or just send it through to you?
You know what, I've got you on LinkedIn, so I can just grab that. And I definitely have the BIA, and I'm sure I can find the B Corp course intro, and I'll pop all of those into our Facebook group where everyone can access all of the links and come back to it even after they've left this session. So
awesome. Yeah, feel free to reach out to me if you want to continue the conversation. I'm happy to talk your ears off about it.
Oh yeah, and the Iris metrics, that was the other one that you mentioned. If you
yes,
put that one through to me, because I don't have that.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely will.
And lean startup methodology.
Yeah, the focus framework.
Perfect. Yes. And yes, thank you so much for your time. I think it's inspired quite a few people to, if not become a B Corp, then at least take the impact assessment to get the benefit out of that.
No, my pleasure. And thank you for having me. It was a great time.
Yes, brilliant. All right. Thanks so much, Jimmy.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.